This is our 75th anniversary. We opened our first branch in 1938 in Rocky Mountain House. And really, when you look at why we were created in the first place, it was to provide capital for small business, farmers, business, and entrepreneurship is in the DNA of ATB. We have 5,300 associates in Alberta, $32 billion in assets. That's a pretty sizable financial institution to be in one province. And we're quite proud of the fact, in fact, that we are within the borders of Alberta, and we stay within the borders of Alberta because it forces us to understand this market better than anybody in the world. And I'm hoping to share some of that insight with you today. And just to share a little bit about who is Business and Agriculture, is that what it says up there? It says that, eh? Good. The line of business I lead is the Business and Agriculture line of business. We have a bit over 500 people across the province who are building relationships with small, mid-sized businesses and farmers. From the top to the bottom, to the east to the west, you'll find them everywhere. We have 82,000 business clients in Alberta. Almost 1 in 4 businesses in this province deal with us in some way. So, and the last infomercial tidbit before we get on. I really didn't want to make this an infomercial, but I'm just so passionate about what we do, I had to share this with you too. Here's the best business case for why ATB is really important to Alberta. You look at this chart and you see in 2008, we all know what happened in 08, the Great Recession came along, 09 happened and banks stopped lending. We could see basically it was like it just came to a dead stop in the marketplace. But what's really interesting, when you look at the blue bar, that's the 5 other big financial institutions and their activity. When you look at the orange bar, we kept lending and we were lending more. And that's because we understand this province. And we All right, so let's talk about business. So these are some stats. You're probably reasonably familiar with some of them. But 81.6% of businesses employ less than 5 people. And we would kind of classify those as micro businesses. It's everything from somebody working in their garage to having a small wholesaling business, you name it, there's everything in there. But it's the vast majority of the businesses in our province. If you were to add to that the businesses that employ 50 people or less, that gets you to 98.1% of the businesses in our province. And we would consider those small businesses. So 98.1% of businesses in Alberta are small business. They're family run or they're owner operated generally. Is quite an amazing fact. And when you look at how many businesses employ between 50 and more than 50 and less than 500 employees, you get 1.8% of the businesses in our province, and that's what would be considered mid-sized businesses. You can measure business size by many measures, revenue, and so on, but we think this is a pretty good indication landscape of what Alberta is made of. Now, what do we know about Alberta SMEs? Actually I should tell you that we ran our first quarterly business survey. We're committed to being knowledge leaders on business in Alberta, and one of the things we wanted to do is go deeper in building insight as to what Alberta business owners and operators are thinking. We ran our first survey. We're going to be running quarterly. By the way, this will be advanced to all of you if you want access to that, to the summary report. We can get you more details, and we've got so many details, we're still trying to figure out what to do with them all. This is the first time it's being presented anywhere. Actually, these results were just released in the last couple days. So you're getting sort of an inside view, and that hasn't been shared anywhere else before. 76% of business owners are optimistic that 6 months from now, the Alberta economy will be better than it is today. Now, we're hearing some noise very, very recently that optimism is dipping, and so the number might be a little bit lower than this. These results were gathered in Q1 of the calendar year. But the point is that it's still a very optimistic environment, and certainly that is what we're seeing among our client base. When you look at how many people are optimistic about their own business, 87% say that they're optimistic about the future of their business. They're more optimistic about their business than they are about the economy at large. Again, these aren't necessarily surprising results, but it is something to know that despite the challenges that we're seeing as of late, there's still a lot of enthusiasm in the marketplace. 86% of businesses, though, will tell you that their future depends on the future of the province. So let's share some facts. Success among Alberta SMEs is closely tied to natural resources. And who's going to say, go duh? Okay, well, I just did. Duh, but there's some interesting insights when you dig a little deeper. What's interesting here is that these numbers have dramatically changed in only a few years. If you were to go back 5 years ago, you would say natural gas was probably going to be the biggest driver of what people saw as an impact on their business, and today it's oil. You probably have anecdotally picked that up. 70% of business owners and operators say that the price of a barrel of oil has a direct impact on their business. 70%. By the way, less than 20% of the numbers, when you look at the numbers of businesses, are actually directly in an energy-related business. So even if you're not directly in an energy-related business, you still think the price of oil has a big impact on your business. That's even if you're just running a restaurant downtown Calgary or, quite frankly, running a corner store in Mountain View, Alberta. The price of natural gas affects 48% of business owners believe that the price of natural gas has an impact on their business. And there's some good news in that, because if you've been tracking natural gas, we're seeing a bit of an upward surge. I don't think anybody 5 years ago would have said $4.12 an MCF would be a great price, but that's where we're at today, and a year ago it was half that. So this might be the beginning of some positive news there. And when you look at intentions, and this is intentions, this is not commitments, in terms of the energy patch, there's still intentions for $48 billion of capital spending this year in Alberta. You've heard some news as of late of some capital projects being delayed, perhaps even put on the shelf, but that's a big number that it's coming off of. In fact, 2013 would be the biggest year ever in Alberta, and bigger than the boom of just a few years ago. So there's still, despite the challenges of late, and we know there are very real challenges, and one thing we all know about Alberta is things can change very quickly. There's still a reason to be fairly positive about the future. So another fact, the majority of Alberta SMEs are growing. And again, you might say, well, that seems kind of logical because the economy is growing and so on, but there's some really neat insight in this one. This is one of my favorites. So 7 in 10 SMEs say they're trying to grow their business, which gets you thinking. So that means 3 in 10 are actually not trying to grow their business, and it's a fact. 3 in 10 entrepreneurs don't want to grow. They want to just stay where they are, stay happy. Let's not grow anymore, just right here. But over half of those are saying, 16% of businesses are saying, despite the fact they're not even trying to grow, they're growing anyway. And I think that's kind of interesting. When you actually look at a number like that, that's a phenomenon you wouldn't find in any other part of the country. I've had the great opportunity to work in some great parts of Canada. Really glad to be in Alberta, but there were great parts of Canada: Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, and they're great places. But I tell you what, businesses there don't grow despite themselves. In Alberta, they can, and that's quite an interesting fact. 48%. This I thought was a pretty low number. Only 48% of businesses said that their growth is as a result of their efforts. And I think that means that they're saying that it's because of the efforts of a lot of others around them, and as well as the greatness of our economy. But some really good numbers here. So over the next 24 months, do they plan to invest? The answer is yes. 63% of businesses say they plan to purchase equipment or machinery. 40% are going to be investing in IT. 39% are expanding in domestic markets. 28% are commercializing new products or services. 19%, so 1 in 5 businesses are investing in R&D. And what's quite incredible about this number, in my opinion, is that when you read anything you read about research and development in Canada says that only large corporations do research and development. What this says is that 1 in 5 businesses in Alberta, small, mid-sized businesses, are planning to do research and development. Let's talk about another fact. SMEs are facing considerable challenges with their growth plans. And that's maybe not a surprise. It's not easy to grow. But when you start looking at the kinds of things that are creating challenges for them, what you find is that the number one pain point is hiring and retaining good people. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But another one is needing to be experts at everything. And when you think about it, this is completely logical. If you're an engineer and you're an expert in engineering, you start an engineering firm. You're a plumber, you're an expert in plumbing, and you start a plumbing firm. But it doesn't necessarily make you an expert on business. And quite frankly, you got to know quite a bit about business, or know a lot of people who do. And I know a lot of those businesses rely on people like you to give them the right advice and point them in the right direction to make the right decisions so they can grow their business successfully. Another big one continues to be access to capital. Banks are lending, organizations are providing capital, yet access to capital is still a big restraint on growth. Managing cash flow is another big one. We'll talk about this, the cycles in our province in a few moments, but it's obviously keeping up our clients up at night. It's keeping business up at night. And now we've got to add to that issue of succession planning. I think we have some interesting insights on that too. So where do SMEs spend their time? Now, I don't expect anybody in the back of the room to be able to read these nice, tiny bar charts. By the way, I did say this is the first time we've done this, and we were just realizing, Ben, we need some nice big pictures. For those of you who've seen Todd Hirsch speak, he's the master, so we're going to get him to prepare our next slide deck. But there's a couple of good takeaways from this. One is that SMEs, their owners and operators, spend most of their time in the operations of their business, running their business, being in their business. Yet when you ask them what is the most important part of the success of their business, they will tell you that is actually growing their business, sales, acquisition of new clients, and so on, but they're not spending their time there. So they're spending their time on operating their business. They're saying they need to be spending their time growing their business. And the most difficult thing that when they're running their business is managing their human resources and labor issues. So just to put this in a bit of context, they're working in their business. They say they need to be working on it, but they're not. And when it comes right down to it, what's keeping them up at night is managing their people. And I think there's some good insight into what that means for how we support businesses across our province. So what's causing them grief? When you really ask small, mid-sized business owners and operators what is keeping them up at night, 49% would say either the top thing or the second biggest thing would be the human resources issue and labor. It drops to a big number 2 on the sales and customer acquisition. Number 3 is strategy and future planning. Believe it or not, that's keeping almost 1 in 4 business owners and operators up at night. Is what the heck is my strategy and what the heck am I going to do to grow this business in the future? 1 in 5 say it's IT, hardware and software. And I feel pretty fortunate. We work for a large institution. We spend bazillion dollars on keeping great world-class IT systems in place. But that's not easy for small and mid-sized business owners. Alberta's population growth is outpacing the rest of Canada. This is another fact that I'm sure you're aware of, but I think there's some interesting insight just as to what a quantum this is over any other part of the country. The population of Alberta grew by 3% last year. That's well more than double the national average, which was 1.1%. So we've heard about the resurgence of Saskatchewan. We're happy for Saskatchewan, very happy for Saskatchewan, in fact, after years of declining population. But the resurgent means they're just growing the population by a bit under 2%. Alberta's 3%. And then you look at the third fastest growing province in Canada. Another province that was flat forever is Manitoba. And they're growing faster than Canada, which is an amazing fact. But just a little bit over 1%. And then it drops off pretty dramatically there. We're growing the population literally triple the national average, and yet we still have human resources, people, and talent issues among small and mid-sized businesses. So I guess the question is, will interprovincial migration into Alberta be enough? Fact, finding skilled labor is the greatest HR and labor issue. So we already said that, but when you think about what are the points of the HR issue that really are the challenging ones, it's finding and attracting quality labor. 86% of those concerned about HR and labor challenges would say that was number 1. 69% said it was replacing key employees. And when you think about this, and I can tell you, we have thousands of customers who would tell you, here are my 2 people. Without them, this business isn't going to work anymore. With the aging population, with a lot of issues, this is a big concern. The third one was a little bit surprising to me. 58% of business owners said that what keeps them up at night when it comes to HR and labor issues is managing young Generation Y workers. Have you heard that from the businesses in your community? Yes, so there's a lot of details there. All right. Fact, competition is the greatest challenge for sales and customer acquisition. And I guess that's healthy, but when you actually look at it, so 49% of those concerned about sales and customer acquisition challenges would say it's competition from large business. 45% would say it's competition from other small business. So competition is keeping people up at night. What is very interesting, though, that is almost equally big, is seasonality is what keeps people up at night. And that shouldn't be surprising to those of you in the energy business, but not all businesses are in the energy business. We live in a province that is in where virtually every industry is somehow affected through seasonality. And so when you think about that, you got to start asking questions. So that is why managing cash flow is a big issue. That is why companies in Alberta tend to sit on a lot of money. But there's a lot of insight that can be gained around seasonality. So another fact, managing growth and expansion is the greatest challenge for strategy and future planning. So what are those challenges? It's managing growth and expansion. When you think about it, I think it would probably be kind of cute to say these are first world problems. I don't think these are first world problems. I think these are growth world problems or growth world problems. I don't think there's probably any other part of the world outside of China who could say that 71% of businesses concerned about the strategy of their business are concerned about managing growth and expansion. That, if you were to go to any other province, I guarantee you, that is not top of mind. It's managing survival on no growth. The second biggest item is focusing business efforts, but the third one is succession planning. And there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about succession planning. We'll talk about it in a moment. And the issue around succession planning is that 42% of SME owner-operators report being 55 years of age and older. And here's the stat that's the kicker here. Remember we said 30% of businesses in Alberta aren't really trying to grow their business. Well, here's maybe the correlation is that those who are over 55 and run their business say that they're 2 to 5 times more likely to be in the mature winding down phase of their business. So I want to tell you a little story. My mother, I mentioned, is an entrepreneur. She's in her mid-late 60s, still running her business. She's got a good 30 employees, and she came to the conclusion recently that it's going to be easier for her to just basically sell off her inventory, carve up her business, and sell it in pieces than it would be to sell it as a going concern. And that business is going away, and 30 jobs will be eliminated, and that is a sad story to me. It's a sad story to her. But the alternative to her was working until she's 80, and she's come to the conclusion that won't work. And why? She's working in her business, not on it. She is the person who has all the contacts. She is the person who knows all the suppliers. She's the person who knows all the customers. And at the end of the day, it's just easier to wind it down. This is a real issue for us in Alberta, knowing that 4 out of 10 entrepreneurs have got to be thinking about their retirement at some point, knowing that they're not planning to grow anymore. And we're in a growth province. We need to be helping these entrepreneurs, these business owners, think about what's next and how to help them plan the succession and the transition of their business. And another stat that's interesting, but from another source, we have a panel of customers who provide us with advice, and hundreds of customers from all across the province. 48% of those age 55 and older do not have a succession plan. So, we've talked about succession for years, and it's never really taken off as an issue that really seems to be that important that we need to move on it. And I'm concerned that if we don't start moving on it soon, that will become the biggest hindrance of growth in our province before we know it. A recent statistic put out by another financial institution recently said that $1.5 trillion of businesses need to change hands in the next 5 years in Canada. And you can imagine Alberta being the place to do business it is, the number here is staggering. So, another fact, keeping up with technology is the greatest challenge for IT. Well, that's not necessarily the biggest surprise, but when you think about how challenging that's got to be for smaller, mid-sized business owners. So you're running a business of 20 or 30 people. You buy a couple PCs or a handful of PCs, everybody gets a laptop, what have you. You've got to be worrying about viruses. You've got to be worrying about what happens when a computer breaks. Because here's the bottom line, is where a business 20 years ago would have managed inventory manually, and they would have had spreadsheets on this and that they could have printed off and then run manually if they wanted to. Businesses can't operate without IT anymore. It doesn't matter what kind of business you are. You may not be in an IT business, but you're running a general store. And your inventory is probably managed by a computer. You're ordering inventory through your computer. You're managing your sales activities through a computer. You're managing your books through a computer. There's nothing that isn't managed through a computer anymore. IT is becoming an increasingly important part of running our businesses, and quite frankly, is a big threat to the success of business if we cannot help business owners keep up. So what are some big conclusions to draw? Is that despite what we hear about the vitamin bubble, and by the way, I hate that word bubble, because it's not a bubble, it's a discount. And it's a discount because we don't have access to markets, and that's just the way it is. But it's not a bubble. There's world demand for the product. But regardless, optimism is high. So we have a lot of people still believe in that glass is half full. Alberta's population is growing quickly, but we really still don't know if that's going to be enough to keep up with the needs of business in our province. And finally, the big question is, there's a need for succession planning. It's a question here, but I'll tell you what, there's a need for succession planning. The question is, what are we going to do to make sure that entrepreneurs have the access to the support they need to transition their business? So, if you want to know more, the summary of all this, I mean, we got reams of data on this stuff. The summary will be provided to all of you. But if you want to know more about any particular point, you can certainly get it from us, and I would strongly encourage you to reach out to us. We'd be happy to provide it. So thank you very much for listening to Stats and Numbers and Small Little Print a morning after the Hospitality Suite. Thank you. Questions if there's time.
Any questions from the audience?
I was just wondering, your statistics there, were they based on people who identified that as a challenge, 71% of those people? Or
Yes.
71%?
So if they identified it as a challenge, then... Oh yes, sorry, thank you. The question was, the stats around, like, if you saw it as a challenge, here are the things that were challenging about it. Yes, so if you didn't say human resources and labor was a challenge, we wouldn't ask you what the challenges were. So it was specific to those who said that was what was keeping them up at night. Good question.
And it's often seasonality. Do you see the link between that and maintaining a strong workforce?
I think it's a great question. Yeah. So again, yeah, repeating the question. I'm not as coachable as I thought I was. The linkage of seasonality in maintaining a strong workforce, I think, is a very legitimate, good question. It's hard to convince somebody to change jobs or join your company when you can only promise them good work 6 months a year or something like that. So no doubt that's an impact or a factor, and it's worth digging into more.
I noticed in your one chart you showed employee attraction being number 1, and yet employee retention was number 4.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but notice the difference in there, because one can directly affect the other so much.
That's a pretty interesting insight, you're right. So I guess we're less stressed about keeping the people we've got than we are finding the people we don't know yet. And that's probably a good insight. So we know what happens when this province really heats up is that we just start trading people all over the place, and that becomes a bigger issue than finding people at the end of the day. It's a good point. And I didn't repeat the question again, so I'm really not coachable.
I was just wondering if you had any solutions to the succession planning aspect of your own
Well, that's a great question. So the question. That's good. Yeah, thank you. Do we have solutions for the succession planning question and potential dilemma? We don't have all the answers, but I can tell you I think we've got some pretty advanced thinking at ATB around how we might tackle it. I'll just share one big issue as an example. If you're a business owner, many entrepreneurs will see almost their entire wealth being the equity in their business. And that's not something you can take to the bank and spend. It's equity. It's often that equity is tied up in goodwill because we built relationships and brand and so on. And so how do you extract that? And then when you want to go sell it, and let's assuming you can, you've got to find somebody who's got millions of dollars or huge sums of money to buy it from you. And that's not easy for people to come up with. You want to sell it to your staff. One of the things we often hear is, I've been running my business for 40 years. I've got these 20 people working for me. They want to buy it, but they can only raise $200,000, and really the business is worth $3 million, so I can't sell it to them. But the problem is I can't sell it to anybody else because they don't know how to run the business. So it's a legitimate challenge. So one thing we are looking at is how we can help clients reduce the value of their business. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but what we're saying is, well, let's lend them money against the equity in their business. So if we take a business that's worth $3 million in equity, goodwill, equity, well, what if we lent them $2? If we lent them $2 million against that goodwill and equity, that means the net value of that business is actually remaining is only $1 million. So maybe it's going to be easier to find somebody who can buy the business for $1 million than $3. And it's a thought. The other issues around succession planning, which are bigger than just ATB, I think this involves the entire professional communities having great conversations with customers about planning for that ultimate succession. Things like maintaining a really strong set of financial records. Getting the books audited, quite frankly. Nobody likes getting an audited financial statement, but if you're buying a business and you weren't working in it, you want an audited financial statement. And you don't want just 1 year, you want a few years, so you can test to know that, this is actually a business with a good track record. Things like who owns the intellectual property in the business. There's intellectual property in every business. Who's the suppliers? Who's got the relationships? Who do we need to know in the marketplace to be successful? Those things need to be transitioned, documented, and what have you, to make sure that somebody's going to be willing to step in, knowing that when the entrepreneur steps away, the business doesn't collapse overnight. And that is actually something we do see happen a lot. Somebody buys a business from an entrepreneur where everything's up here in the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur says, yeah, I'll help out. But when they move to Florida, they forget to return calls. And then all of a sudden, the business isn't so easy. So anyway, there's a lot of issues. I think we as professionals have to work together to figure out how to help businesses to think that way. Thank you.
Again, on the succession, we work at a small family farm.
I'm going to get this. So in rural environment, what about the small town farm?
Yeah, or the small family farm.
Small family farm. The farm is a challenging one because we know what we're hearing from our customers, and certainly we have a lot of farm customers in this province, is that my kids, when we look at the population of the family farm, many are owned by that 55+ age group. Their kids have moved away. A lot of them don't want to necessarily take over the farm. What we are seeing is a lot of consolidation. So the neighboring farmer buying your farm, and their neighbor buying all 3 farms, and then growing. And we're seeing that, if in the 1980s a 3,000 acre farm was typical, and let's say it's 5,000 to 6,000 acres today, it's getting to be 8,000 to 10,000 is really the numbers that are making farms work today. And we can see that's continuing to go up. So we want to do what we can to support family farms, to continue the tradition, but I think a real challenge will be continuing the slow decline of the numbers because of that very issue. So thank you very much. Thank you.